Yeah, welcome once again to our Pan-African Reading Club. This is where we review and discuss various books. The first book for review is actually Dr. Georgia Iti, Defeating the Dictators. And last time we were reading at issues to do with the currency change as part of the evidence or symptoms of the demise of despotic regime. And today we will be going ahead to look at the rising public discontent and resentment from the public as one of the ways of the fall of a dictator. You see, Dr. Iti says that dictatorial governments sometimes fall down automatically. The systems calm down, the system crumbles automatically. And these are some of the symptoms that show that fall or the crumbling of the system. So welcome all, and let's have our engagement on this paragraph. As usual, we read one subheading, we discuss it a bit, then we go to the next subheading. So to members who are with us, Brother Ifo, Brother Kwam, Coco, Sachisomo, feel most welcome. And to those who will be reviewing our recording also, we really appreciate your time. Feel free to share your comment with us and your thoughts on our YouTube channel once this video is out, so that together we can learn and try to understand some few things. One disclaimer is that this here represents the belief of the writer. We do not subscribe to it, but rather we discuss to critically analyze it. So it's not dogmatic text. It's what we analyze and share our thoughts on what the writer or the author think about in regards to dictators or demons of dictator or dictatorship. So once again, thank you and feel most welcome. If there's any member who's in a position to read for us, let me know so that you can read for us the text under this subheading, Rising Public Discontent. If there's no member, then I'll read it, and then we can share our thoughts on that. Anybody? Okay, and then I'll go ahead and read it. The text says, despots delude themselves into believing that they can fool their people all the time. It's only a matter of time before the people realize that all the long, grandiloquent speeches, revolutionary rhetorics, hoary vituperation, and posturing are just a charade. They do not create jobs, put food on their table, or put gasoline in their cars. People can see that commodity shortage are rampant. Hospitals lack basic essential medicines. Roads are pitted with yawning potholes that are big enough to swallow trucks. Electricity supply is sporadic. The water tap speeds are dropped now and then, and jobs are scarce. Even more annoying, people are forbidden to complain about grotesque mismanagement and administrative ineptitude. The despot must be praised all the time. Any whiff of criticism is swiftly and brutally squashed. It does not take long for people to realize that they have been duped again. With inflation running at 30% annually, government services deteriorating, and crime hitting the poor the hardest, Venezuelans are simply fed up with Chavez's regime. Some even joke that they will be safer in Iraq than in Venezuela. According to the New York Times, in Iraq, a country with about the same population as Venezuela, there were 4,644 civilian deaths from violence in 2009, according to Iraq body count. In Venezuela that year, the number of murder climbed over 16,000. More than 90% of murders go unresolved or unsolved without a single arrest. What incessant problem even more is the widespread corruption and ostentatious living of so-called revolutionaries. Said Maria Escalante, as co-principal in Barquisimeto, Venezuelans who first embraced the Chavez Revolution and later became thoroughly disenchanted with it. The reality is that government has deteriorated with so many big corruption scandals. I think what is happening is that President Chavez does not listen to the people. When the people become tired of rampant corruption, street protests often morph into political campaign that lead to the ouster of the despot, as in Iran in 1979, the Philippines in 1989, Indonesia in 1998, Tunisia in 2011, Egypt in 2011. It was corruption and suppression of opposition voices during the Shah's rule that caused Iran constitutional monarchy to collapse, allowing conservative clerics to seize power and establish a hardline Islamic state. But then the clerics betrayed the ideals of their own Islamic revolution. Such was also the case in Chavez, who rose to power on vigorous anti-corruption campaign. Evidently, those who do not learn from history are bound to repeat it. In Iran, history is being repeated. Dissent has emerged within the inner circle of Ahmadinejad's Islamic Republic in Iran, which has hit with defections after the brutal clampdown on street protests following the fraudulent election where Ahmadinejad claimed to have won. I quote, "I want the regime to be overthrown," said Fazad Fahagian, a former press attaché in the Iranian embassy in Brussels, who defected in September 2010. He followed Hossein Alizadeh, the second in command at Iranian embassy in Norway, where the consul, Mohammad Reza Haidari, had already resigned. All three openly support Iran democratic opposition, the Green Movement. They have every reason to be angry. The revolution has failed and betrayed them. In 1978, before the 1979 revolution, Iran produced 6 million barrels of oil a day. In 2000, 4.5 million, most recently 3.5 million. This will fall further in 2011. The regime blames Western sanctions against its nuclear program, but the more realistically, mismanagement and crumbling production facilities are the main culprit. Thus, the subheading under the what we call raising public discontent and resentment under despotic regimes. And allow any member want to share something in regards to what the author is presenting. What do you think about that? Feel free to unmute yourself. Then we'll go to the next subheading. Welcome.
Since I'm going to be largely listening in about 20 minutes from now, allow me to farm my thoughts now. I understand where Josh Ait is coming from, but he's using all very bad examples. The examples that he is using are largely of socialist states, which the West ganged up against them and put up sanctions against them. Let's not forget, the Shah in Iran was installed by the CIA and the MI6 after they ousted Mossadegh in 58 revolution. So the revolution of 79 was a counter-revolution, with the people of Iran now taking over. Whereas the earlier revolution was what you call the Crimson Revolution, which the CIA and the MI6 will whip public sentiment and ensure that the public take over, but only to give them the chance. Because what Mossadegh had done was to nationalize the assets of British petroleum at the time, meaning the British were very upset with that. So along with the Americans, the British came along and toppled Mossadegh and brought in someone else who was the West dictator. And he is not talking about that dictator. He is not talking about what happened under a CIA MI6 supported dictator. He was the West. He was the West. And with Chavez as well, because Chavez brought in socialism in Venezuela, just like Castro brought in socialism in Cuba. They put up sanctions against them. Okay? And Iran also faced sanctions over nuclear weapons. But even before that, they faced sanctions because they toppled a CIA-controlled government. They toppled a Western-backed government. So they put up sanctions against these guys, and they even funded Saddam to fight against Iran when Iran was still at its weakest state just after the revolution in 79. I think the war started in 81 or 82 and lasted up until 1988 or so. And after that, Saddam was also broken. After that war, Saddam was broken as a dictator who was supported by the CIA and MI6. Then what Saddam did the next was he went and took over the Kuwait oil fields because he needed money after that. But then the Americans came after him because he fell out of favor. So I don't disagree that there will be times when people rise up, but let's not forget the external influence. The external influence is massive. It plays a big part, just as it did in Pakistan against Khan, Imran Khan, after Khan went to Russia to meet Putin. When they said they told him not to go, his handlers told him not to go, and then he came back and made a statement which he said, "We are not slaves. We are not less slaves. We won't listen to anyone." Days after that, he was toppled because the CIA took control. There was a guy there who is actually Asian, who was working as a director of strategy at the CIA. He was involved. He met with the ICS, the Secret Service in Pakistan, and not long after that, Imran Khan was toppled. It's the same thing with Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh, another crimson revolution, which we still don't know what's happening, but we know external hands were involved. So I would really like him to talk about Magufuli or talk about someone else who was considered a dictator. Talk about Kwame Nkrumah, because Nkrumah was also seen as a dictator before he was toppled. And talk about what Nkrumah had achieved during his time. He's not talking about that. So he's being selective with his evidence to back up what he thinks he's trying to back up, right? The other one is Mobutu. Mobutu stayed in power from 1965 all the way up to 1998. That's a very long time when he was actually using people's money. And he was not toppled by the people. He was toppled by Kabila. Kabila, who was then supported by the Rwandans and the Ugandans, Kagame and the Museveni. Wasn't the people. So I don't know. I don't know. Somehow when I was listening to you read this paragraph, I was thinking, was Haiti in the pay payroll of the CIA? Was he there to spread the propaganda which he was paid to do? Was he an asset or what? Because yeah, we like the dictators to go. We want the dictators to go, but who else is not a dictator? Are you going to tell me that Trump himself is not a dictator? Is Trump not a dictator in the United States? Is wasn't Boris Johnson a dictator here when he prorogued the parliament? He prorogued parliament and took power, in short. But for him, the people's anger was swift, all right. But his examples are bad because there's no quantitative evidence to say these are how many dictators who I've seen go through this. He just listed those ones which he wants to support his case. So I don't know about George sometimes, but we'll see as we go. Maybe as we continue reading. Let me stop here and let others to share their thoughts. Thank you.
Bakoko, thank you. And I know Sawindo hand is up. I think there's one thing we need to discuss a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is the actions of these leaders appear dictatorial? Of course, there might be reasons that force these leaders to act in this way. And those reasons might also be caused by external influence, you see, as it's
Mm-hmm.
listed. Because I
Yeah,
believe that even the so-called dictators cannot be dictators independently. There must be also outside influence, you see?
exactly.
And not only make them dictators, but some influence that can make them be very stringent in terms of how they allow freedom of speech and everything else. You see?
Mm-hmm.
For
Mm-hmm.
example, if you look at now Traore, if the West might want to topple him down, what will they do? They'll give uprise to various dissenting voices, activists, and the so-called, you see? Then they'll
Mm-hmm.
claim freedom of speech and everything else, you see?
Exactly.
If we try to control that dissenting voices with any force they're saying, either killing or things that they are listing here that makes one a dictator, then
Mm-hmm.
people will categorize Traore as a dictator. But the question is, one is that do we justify the means, or do we also go ahead to ask the reason for the means? Because, for example, they have listed Chavez and what he did to kill the protests and so many things that he was talking, the inflation that was going on in the country and blah, blah, blah. But the question is, why did he do this? When you're saying so many things like the nuclear weapons and everything else that was toppled, is you are saying that there was external influence that makes somebody to be very stringent. For example, the Moi dictatorship in Kenya killed so many people, and many people are fighting for liberation in Kenya, where he ruled for 24 years. Museveni
Mm-hmm.
has been ruling for 40 years and so. He can qualify to be called a dictator. But at the same time, he might be using ruthless means. But we also go extra mile to check why is he using the ruthless means. So is the balance between the reason for the action and judging the action of an individual who is a leader to label them any name you want to label them. What do you think about that?
So to answer your question, I'll go back to what I said earlier. It depends which dictator it is. If it's a dictator who is favored by the West, they do everything to protect him. You won't even know that that dictator is there. There are dictators who they have aligned with, like Paul Biya. You don't hear as much about Paul Biya, even though Paul Biya is demented right now. Doesn't have anything to do because he's a French puppet. Okay, he's a French puppet. Another one is Ouattara in Ivory Coast. Ouattara is a dictator, and he has been installed by the French, but because they protect him, he's okay, regardless of what he does. Um, Regarding how Chavez turned out, how he became, there are many reasons, but I think chief of them is that he would have faced sanctions from outside. They wouldn't want to trade with him, especially at the doorstep of the or backyard as they usually call it, just like uh, Fidel Castro, the Cubans. They put a lot of sanctions against Cuba. They wanted Cuba destroyed, just to prove that socialism is a bad economic model. Okay, so whoever rules in that country, such as that, they have to find ways in which they deal with that. And it's the same thing with Nkrumah. Nkrumah, I don't disagree. There were cases where some of the officials within his party became corrupt. There are elements in parties which become corrupt, but a lot more pressure is exerted from outside once they have targeted you and identified you as a threat to their world order. Okay? So it becomes a fight against the West using the mega resources that the people have. And most importantly, it becomes then a coercive force for cohesion, which Nkrumah describes in his book, Conscientism. And they will not talk about even Mobutu. Mobutu, they were using Mobutu in Angola. Mobutu was their conduit for weapons and other logistical support to Savimbi in Angola against the Angolan people. So they will not talk about Mobutu as a dictator. For them, he was the right dictator. And don't forget, they, the USA, at some point, they talked about the storm men, the age of the storm men. These are the people who destroyed democracy, as we see it, because they promoted the counter-revolutionaries. Most of the coups that happened in Africa in the 60s up to the early 80s were largely supported from the West, were supported by these guys. And they'll continue to turn the other way, turn a blind eye while their dictators did everything possible. But a dictator who was not to their liking, they will do everything to bring them down. And that's where the real conflict comes into play. Then you find you're isolated. You find you have to protect the regime that you have. But as for Museveni, I don't know. Museveni is Museveni. He just wants to hold on to power for 40 years. He wants to die in power, just like Biya. Biya also. I mean, I think Biya is being used now because he's useless. You might have seen the USA Africa Trade Summit. I think that was in December 22, where he was already like spent, but they still want him to run, and he cannot appear in public to defend that. But they still want to use him as a front. So, to answer your questions, it depends which dictator it is. If it's the dictator for the right side, the world order, they turn a blind eye. If it's the wrong dictator, then they put up everything to make sure that that dictator appears bad in the eye of the people, in the eyes of the people, and even support the people. They even fund some of these revolutions. You cannot tell me that Syria, they were not supported, or even in Libya, it wasn't funded from outside. Gaddafi, maybe you can call him a dictator if you want to call him a dictator, but Gaddafi did a lot of people for the Libyan people, a lot of things for the Libyan people. And then he had to be painted as a bad dictator because he was funding lots and lots of revolutions around the world. So Gaddafi was more like Castro. Castro was giving material support to lots of people who were fighting for the revolution, and I think helped Venezuela in a way. But it depends. It always depends on who you are, whose side are you on. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Brother Ifo, please come in. Brother Ifo?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. A lot of what I wanted to say has already been sort of covered, but I will address the question that you asked. about someone using dictatorial means. And I think that while it is a valid question, in the concept of the text that we just read, it is actually a dangerous question because it can disguise what is really happening. For example, um, you have socialists who were trying to figure out ways to share the resources of their nations with the people that were under attack by imperialists, mostly the US. And so if we do not include that in our description, um, for example, the Canadian government will regard Chavez as a dictator and Trump as uh, as a democratic leader, and there's no one that can look at both situations with based just on facts and no political rhetoric, and come to the conclusion that Trump uh, is democratic. So it seems that I appreciate the analysis that is in this text, but I think the people that they use it as examples are part of political propaganda because we cannot. There was Chavez, there were a few other people that were listed there, and they they listed people who were serving the people, not not um, not the conclusions were correct. The people that they were giving the conclusion were wrong, and that's why I think we need to be careful as we analyze things so that we do not make the mistake of repeating colonial talking points, because if we only look at it that way, then we will, as was said earlier, we would say Nkrumah was a dictator. We would say anyone that ever fought against imperialism was a dictator. Whereas when they like someone, as was said earlier, you can exploit your people all they want, so long as you continue to give the West all your resources, the same way as the person that U.S. is trying to recognize as the current president of Venezuela. He gave away the state's oil companies to American interests, and so now they consider him a champion of the people. So I think that was really dangerous line of thinking. Those are my reflections, and I'll yield the mic. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Brother Efos. Windhoek?
Good evening. I'm driving. I hope my background is not too much disturbing. But I joined late. But if I'm not wrong, I heard Brother Coco saying Kwame Nkrumah was a dictator. If it is the case, if I heard him wrong, what qualifies Kwame Nkrumah to be a dictator? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else who want to comment on this text before we go to the next paragraph? But what I agree with you is that the analysis might be right that qualify some level of dictatorship, but the analysis is tending to ignore the conditions of the situation that then led to such actions. And again, as Brother Coco is saying, there's a selective analysis. And you see, the people who have been mentioned here, they have not mentioned any leader in Africa so far in regards to this. But Brother Coco has given us even the background of what led to Iran being where it was. The Chavez history has been brought into place. And you see, the index of measuring who dictator is or not is also on whose framework. And those are things actually, that's what brings the comparison some of us are saying between Chavez and Trump and so many other things. So I think it's a good analysis, and that's what we need in this class. Because when you're meeting a text that is to be exposed to guide maybe some Pan-Africans around who is a dictator or how to defeat a dictator, then everybody who might expose themselves to this text without critical analysis will take everything as it is, that this is what makes a dictator and this is how to defeat a dictator. But some of us coming from the level of high consciousness based on what we've been doing in our consciousness on every Thursday, we have been able to develop some level of critical analysis that help us not to actually fully object the text, but critically examine the text to give our critical analysis. And that's what we encourage. And with that, I know new members have joined us as we move along. We'll go read the next subheading, then you allow members to share their thoughts. What you are reading is Dr. It is showing how dictatorial regimes are actually going down, the demise of dictatorial regimes. And in this context, is trying also to show what makes them dictatorial. And I think that's what we are analyzing currently. Sawindo, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I heard what you were saying, but I don't know whether I have made myself to understand correct or wrong. To me, dictatorship is a trait of leadership. So why wouldn't you expect leaders to be free from dictatorial traits? Thanks.
Okay. So you say dictatorial or dictatorship is inseparable from leadership. Every leader must be a dictator.
Not necessarily that everybody must be a dictator, but to me, dictatorial traits are part of leadership, because many a time the people you are leading do not understand their objectives and their goals. And you have to lead the way for them until such time they understand. And in the process, while they haven't understood, they would feel being forced or being coerced to follow that trait. So dictatorial traits and leadership, to a certain degree,
Sawindo? Okay. Sister Chisomo, then Brother Ifo.
Good evening. No, I kind of missed the reading, but just listening to the comments about dictatorship. I don't know if Hastings was mentioned in the list, but as Windhoek is saying, I do agree with that to a certain extent. I base that on the cultural aspect of us, the way we run our communities, the way we run our homes. Somebody somewhere has to be a leader who then gives instructions, and very strict instructions in our homes, in our communities. If that's what we call dictatorship, we wouldn't call it dictatorship, would we? We would just say, oh, we need to be strict with our children. We need to be strict with this one, that one, this one. In classes, in school, it's the same system. So when it comes to running the country, we are somehow going to run it the same, especially if people are being unruly or are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, I suppose. So it could be dictatorship in a good way and dictatorship in a bad way, depending on which way it's going. For example, what Traore is doing, because, for example, like the the Botswana leader said, oh, when Traore wakes up, when he goes home, he just thinks, tomorrow I'm going to say this, tomorrow I'm going to say this. And then he comes into the office. This is what we're going to do. This is what is going to happen. And everybody does it. They listen to him. Whereas if he said it in his country, nobody would listen. They'll just look away. They'll just walk away. I remember our vice president complaining recently, saying you'd call somebody, they don't just turn up. You summon them, they just don't turn up. It's like, what can you do about it? Challenging them in a way. So how do you deal with such behavior? And also, as far as the West is
You
concerned,
kill them.
sorry? So as far as the
Go
West
ahead.
is concerned, as far as the
Yeah, go
West is
ahead, Sister
concerned,
Chisom.
yeah, as far as the West is concerned, they also have their own definition, depending on what they want from that country or that person. So before we had all this social media, blah, 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 we used to take their version of dictatorship. If they branded somebody dictatorship, we all went, he's a dictator, he's a this. Who is that guy they killed in Libya? So, and now we're going, oh, no, he wasn't a dictator. Actually, he was a good person. Actually, Mugabe was a good person. Actually, Idi Amin was not bad. Actually, Malawi is saying Hastings was the best president we ever had, because we never understood what these guys meant and why they're saying what they're saying. So now we have our version of dictatorship. But like I said, when you look at the structures in the community culturally, that's how we do things. The chief, that's how he does things. Um, and yeah, that's what I can say for now.
Okay, thank you, Sister Chisom. I think remind me of what former President Moise said sometimes back when he was ruling and when he was ruling with some force. You remember we have been learning about society and ideology in consciousness and the element of coercion for cohesion. And does it mean that the society can then move in same direction without some level of coercion? And if that level of coercion is exerted in order to achieve cohesion across the country, does that qualify to be dictatorship? And then you ask yourself what I said, that President Moi once said that Mwafrika ni kichwa ngumu. He said that an African is tough-headed, and therefore to deal with an African is not easy. And therefore you have to be very tough-headed in order to deal with Africans who are tough-headed. That was President Moi saying to qualify some of the means that were seen to be very tough enough. But yes, Brother Ifo, go ahead. Sister Chisomo?
Yeah, and also if you remember Gaddafi himself, when all this democracy phenomenon kind of came up, and he literally said, those kind of democracies don't work in this part of the world. Because if you let people loose, do what they like, which is what happened in Malawi when we changed to multi-party, the definition was you can do whatever you like to whoever you want. And people literally did that. They would rip up your fence, they would take it away, they would walk into the offices, rip off the phones, rip off the chairs, desks, took them home. So, and in the process, corruption just overnight, robbery, theft was democracy. No more dictatorship. You're free. It's a free world. So, yeah.
Okay, Brother Ifo?
Yes. Fela Kuti reminded us in one of his famous songs where he called it "Them All Crazy," demonstration of crazy them all. Um, but that being said, Someone earlier had talked about the need for a dictator to be a dictator until the people understand. Um, I have mixed emotions about that, or I would say not emotions, but mixed intellect. I am both agreeing and also deeply disagreeing. I am agreeing in that there's a need for the leadership to be principled and know where they're going. I also think that there's a need for true leadership will be a servant of the people, and a servant of the people will be doing the bid of the people, which means that you need to also have deep conversations with the people. And Mikhail Cabral talked about, tell no lies, claim no easy victories, and the importance of actually understanding what the material needs of the people are. And I think once you have a informed population that understand who they are, and if we're talking in the African context, understanding the culture of their ancestors, not the ones that took the colonizers' ways, whether that be the colonizers' ways of Christianity or the colonizers' ways of Islam. I'm talking understanding who you truly, really are. When you understand who you are, that's why we talk about a cultural revolution. When you have a cultural revolution, your understanding changes. You shift from I to we. You start thinking in the spirit of Ubuntu, in the spirit of Sankofa. When you think in those ways, and you have a village and then a city and then a country that is thinking in that ways, then you can have the sort of freedom that for people to do what they want to do, as was talked about in Malawi. But you need the first step of the cultural grounding. It's like if you have a bunch of children and you decide you're just going to let the children eat whatever they want. If they've been introduced to McDonald's and other crappy food, they will end up eating sweets and useless food. But if you had brought those children up and understand that their body is the temple, and they understand the importance of vegetables, they understand the importance of balanced meal, they understand the importance of fitness, then when you leave them to eat whatever they want, they will still eat well. But we collectively, the colonized peoples and even the colonizers themselves, have not done a job in educating and culturally correcting the errors of colonialism. And that's why what's happened is people are just repeating, even when they say they want to be free, they're trying to be, as Franz Fanon said, like the colonizers instead of being like themselves. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I
Let's
just
look a
come in
bit
for
on. No, I think it's okay, but I think you're making general comments rather than the textual comments. But you're okay to go ahead, Sister Chisom, before we read the next text.
no, I was just going to say, oh, well, if it's off the topic, then let's leave it for now.
No, it's what you're saying is general comment in regards to the dictatorship, but not contextual in regards to the text, which is okay. I can still read this and still your comment can retain. Because when you come in, you can still give the same comment because it's more of general comment. But if you feel it's very specific comment, you can still go ahead. If you feel it's general
No,
comment, I can read and still start with it.
I was just going to follow up on what Brother Ifo has just said. I was just thinking, I believe what has happened in my country this election is that cultural revolution. People have seen what they've seen in this administration, and they've decided, no, that's not good for us. That's not how we want to live our lives. Let's get back the previous leader. Because to them, culturally, he is the elder. Like I said, we had 17 contestants. So to them, they have that cultural relationship of dad and their children. Like you're saying, if you let the children go haywire, something is going to happen. So they've decided to go to this parent. They literally have a father and children relationship that has come up in Malawi, instead of having this leader, a political leader, whom they believe is not living the way they should be living, how Malawi as a culture lives, or how democracy is affecting how we live. So a cultural shift has happened. And where we go from here, I don't know.
Thank you. So let's look at what the author is presenting in the next subheading, which is the paranoia and overreaction. He says that since the tyrant knows that he has done evil, he is afraid of his own shadow. So he sees conspiracy all around him. The paranoia and overreaction characterize despotic rule. One of the despot's most necessary problem is how to guard his claim to the presidency. No potential challenger must be permitted to gain a power base. The people love him. So any show of public disaffection rattles the regime and must be squashed instantly, lest it spread. The security forces in particular are extremely sensitive to any whiff or sign of protest and criticism, and they often react with hysteria when they suddenly find themselves overtaken by events they had not foreseen. Such miscalculations may cost them their jobs or even their lives. In this atmosphere of intrigue and suspicion, divisions eventually emerge within the ruling circle. Divisions that a smart opposition should always foment and exploit. Very important. That in this atmosphere of intrigue and suspicion, division eventually emerges within the ruling circle. Divisions that a smart opposition should always foment and exploit. Rebels or reformists may appear to challenge the existing order or move the ruling party in a new direction. A case in point happened in Mexico in 1987 when Cuauhtemoc Cardenas and other politicians from the ruling Partido Revolucionario Institucional, which is the PRA, Institutional Revolution Party, that had held power for more than 70 years, announced the creation of Corriente Democrática, which is Democratic Current, within the party to discuss an alternative way of nominating a PRI candidate for the presidency other than El Dedazo, by which by which the incumbent picked his successor by pointing his finger. The Democratic Current nominated Cardenas as its candidate. Although he did not win in 1988, his efforts, together with worsening crisis, Zapatista rebellion, and mounting street protests, paved the way for a defeat of PRI and the polls by Vicente Fox in 2000. breakaways factions have appeared in ruling parties in many developing countries. For example, in Uganda, in 2001, Dr. Kizza Besigye, once the physician, confidant, and cabinet minister of dictator Yoweri Museveni, broke away to form his own party, which was the Forum for Democratic Change, to contest the presidential election in 2001 and 2006. Another cabinet minister, Jaberi Bidandi Sali, broke rank to form the People's Progressive Party. In Kenya, in 2002, Raila Odinga, the then Secretary General of Kenya African National Union Party, the KANU, which had held power since independence in 1963, Raila Odinga resigned and formed Rainbow Movement, which later teamed up with several other parties to form the National Rainbow Coalition, which is NAC, that eventually defeated President Arap Moi protege, who was Uhuru Kenyatta. In Iran, after the disputed June 2009 election, wide splits occurred within Iran's regime. Though the supreme leader, Grand Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, backed President al-Ahmadinejad, several clerics did not. Among them were many senior clerics like Qam, including Grand Ayatollah Nasser, Makarem Shirazi, and Grand Ayatollah Hossein Ali Montazeri, who died in December 2009, and former President Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani. In November 2010, a rift erupted when Parliament attempted to impeach the president. Some 74 lawmakers accused the president and his government of 14 counts of violating the law, often by acting without the approval of the legislature. In North Korea, Kim Jong-nam, the eldest son of the leader Kim Jong-il, told Japanese television that he opposed the generational transfer of power to his younger half-brother Kim Jong-un. In Russia, after Moscow Mayor Yuri Luskov criticized President Dmitry Medvedev in September 2010 for his indecisiveness and suggested that his predecessor, Vladimir Putin, now Prime Minister, should return to the presidency. He was sacked. Luskov later announced plans to set up a new political movement to challenge the ruling party. Now, such political feuds and infighting can have serious political and economic ramifications. They may spell the beginning of the end of despotic regime and the opening up of political space. Breakaway factions or leaders have the goods on the despot, an intricate knowledge of how the regime functions and the dastardly deeds and crime it has committed. Fearful that malcontents might spill the beans, the despot may not seek to crush them. Now, political fueling can also cause serious economic problems, as it creates uncertainty and deter long-term involvement. In November 2010, Russia's central bank raised its forecast capital outflow to $22 billion for the year, up from its October estimate of $12 billion. Monthly outflow had risen from $3 billion in July to same $3 billion in a week in August. Analysts suggested that The ousting of Mayor Yuri Luskov in Moscow might have triggered the October acceleration in outflow. Business groups worried that they could get caught in the crossfire if the infighting escalated. That's the end of that reading. The floor is open for members to share their thoughts in regards to that text. Anybody want to come in, feel free to come in on that text. Is there anybody who want to comment on the text I've read?
Okay,
If you want to comment on the text,
briefly.
yeah, you can just do a brief comment. We are just doing a book review basically and book discussion.
Yes, I agree with the paranoia and overreaction. You see that right now in how Trump is attempting to to eliminate even comedians from being able to talk about what they're really doing. We also see the same thing in Israel. You see the same thing in Nigeria with Tinubu. And if we look at the history of almost every true dictator, you see that. Um, so yeah, I agree with that. And the opposite of that is we see what happened in Libya when Gaddafi was not afraid to provide weapons to the citizenship to defend the nation, whereas a dictator would not want to give weapons to the people because they'll be afraid that the people will overthrow them. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Ifo. Anyone else want to share anything in regards to that text? Sister Chisomo? Sir Windhoek? Okay, Sir Windhoek? Anyone, Leonard, Sir Windhoek, or anybody want to share their review in regards to that text, just feel free to come in. If no, we'll move to the next text. But I will say that, yes, I understand the paranoia and the division internally. And that's why even I understand when the authors say that those who actually depart from the ruling class, the dictator might not be able to crush them sometimes because they know that those dissenting voices have some secrets of the system. But the question and the problem we get most of the time is that the dissenting voices that have come from the system will tend to lead the opposition and therefore get the majority of support of the people. And sometimes they even end up being presidents to replace the current regime. But I don't think they change away from the practice. They continue the same thing. And another thing that I see that has been also highlighted here is the fear to get out of power. And you see, some of these dictators might be afraid. You see, they say that they would like to guard their presidency. So some of them, like in Africa, where term limits most of the time is not respected, will not want to leave power, not because they have something they still want to do for the people, but basically because they're afraid of what might happen in case they leave power. So yes, indeed, they might want to stay there to just guard their leadership and presidency, not to the interest of the majority of the citizens, but for their own interest. And as an example, you see, I don't know, there's a news that there's a daughter of which president that has actually asked the citizen not to vote his father again. Because the father has ruled for the longest time possible. Same thing can be applied in Uganda. Museveni has ruled for the longest time possible. Even Kagame don't want to leave power. Because, not because they want to develop sometimes, but because they just want to guide their presidency. So I think that was also something important that I noticed in the text that I may like also want to point out to. Anybody who still wants something they want to point out to, feel free to come in. If there's none, then I'll proceed to our last paragraph for today, which will be on the political instability. And the author says that a despotic regime is inherently unstable because it is repressive and lacks legitimacy. Its credibility also erodes with time, as allegations of corruption, malfeasance, and mismanagement become rampant. The massive bureaucracy it creates to carry out its dictates is plagued by graft and inefficiency and becomes dysfunctional. The threat to such a regime may come from four sources. Political parties are not included because the despot can always ban them. The first source is popular protest over economic hardship. For example, lack of jobs, rising prices, or even non-delivery of basic social services, and perception of corruption. Two is about politically marginalized groups that have been excluded from graphic trade. And three is intrigue and jostling within the palace, what you call the palace coup. And fourthly is from the military. Now, as the economy deteriorates, with unemployment soaring, prices rising, and commodity shortages becoming rampant, public anger and disappointment may erupt into street protest. Now, there have been many such protests in the developing world over price hikes for food, gasoline, and other basic necessities. Now, though they may not have any political intent or motivation, this protest can deliver an indictment of the regime. And smart opposition leaders can capitalize on them and transform them into a potent political campaign against the despotic regime, as it occurred in Tunisia in December 2010, and also in Egypt in February 2011. Now, despot becomes panicky in the face of street protest. He knows that if he reacts brutally with excessive force, he risks international condemnation and being seen as anti-people. Now, former Tunisian President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali cracked down hard on street protest at first, and then relented, as did with Hosni Mubarak of Egypt. Now, on the other hand, if he allows the street protest to continue, they might trigger a palace or military coup against him. So some despots choose to implement some hasty reforms, but to no avail. Half-baked reforms only infuriate the people, who perceive them as a sign of weakness and are emboldened to demand the resignation of the despot, as it happened in Tunisia and Egypt. Even when such public protests do not occur, the perception of corruption can often lead to the downfall of the despot. Now, his orders are ignored or sneered at, even by his own lieutenants, who may now think that his revolution is a scam and that they are being taken for fools. Now, why work for such a corrupt buffoon who has built palaces for himself amid massive social misery and suffering? They may ask. Now, people start sabotaging government operations and helping themselves to government property. The perception of corruption can be demanding to a despotic regime. It brought down the Shahs of Iran in 1979 and is most frequently cited as the justification for nearly all the military coups that have taken place in the developing world. But even where corruption is not the issue, the regime's governing style can also trigger instability. By definition, a despotic regime is a politically closed system run by the despot and a small coterie of inner advisors, or allies, or armed henchmen. Now, all channels for political change are blocked or even shut down, and elections are a farce because the despot always wins. Thus, it is only a matter of time before some group decides that effecting change through the ballot box or some other peaceful means is all but impossible. They might trick on that if the despot cannot be persuaded by the force of argument. He might perhaps be persuaded by the argument of force. They might trick on that if the despot cannot be persuaded by the force of argument. He might perhaps be persuaded by the argument of force. Now, they may pick up guns and start a guerrilla movement or even a rebel insurgency. Now, the rebel insurgencies are always started by politically excluded groups. They often start in the countryside and make their way towards the seat of power in the capital. There have been a plethora of such rebel insurgencies and guerrilla movement in the developing world in the past decades, such as Mujahideen of Afghanistan, who fought against the pro-Soviet-backed government in the 1970s, and the Tamil Tigers, who began as a violent offensive against the government of Sri Lanka in 1980s. In Latin America, guerrillas have operated in such countries as Colombia through the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, in Mexico through the Zapatistas, in Nicaragua through the Sandinistas, and in Peru through the Shining Path and Tupac Amaru. Africa has had more than 30 rebel insurgencies since the 1960s. Now, these rebel insurgencies, however, are not to be recommended as they often degenerate into civil wars. They can range for years or even decades because despots are often incapable of crushing them. In fact, no African despot has been able to put down a rebel insurgency. The rare quantum distractions cause utter chaos and inflict horrendous human toll. More than 5 million perished in the Democratic Republic of Congo as a result of civil war and war-related diseases between 1996 and 2004. Sudan's civil war claimed more than 4 million people. Further civil wars destroy infrastructure and hasten the collapse of the economy and even the entire state, resulting into a failed or collapsed state, as it happened in Liberia, Sierra Leone, Somalia. Rebuilding after civil war takes billions that the poor countries do not have. The greatest threat to a despot is more likely to come from within his own military. Military despots often seize power by staging coups, and they fear that other military officers may entertain similar design. As Samuel De Carlo puts it, military hierarchies often carry within them the seeds of their own destructions or instability. Most of them have been rocked by internal power struggle, functionalism, decay of cohesion, and disciplined personal power gambits, and successful or attempted coups. Richard Sandbrook also emphasized this point that armed forces are generally strong men's Achilles heel. To capture and neutralize the army, the ruler has two options. One, he can transform it into a force led and perhaps manned by his followers, or he can build up a personally loyal counterforce. But there's a catch. Either route may provoke the officer corps if they perceive a threat to their prestige or personal economy. Now, tyrants spent an inordinate amount on an elaborate security military structures to protect themselves and suppress their people. They have created layers upon layers of security, just in case one layer fails, and shower security agents with gifts, perks, amenity, but they do not trust the military completely. So they create a special division like force like Gaddafi 32nd Presidential Brigade led by his son, and equip it with better weapons than the ordinary soldiers have, so that the brigade can put down any uprising or coup attempts from the military. Despite enormous amount they spend on elaborate layers of security, however, in the end, despots are hoisted by their own placards. Now we have examples there, making what you can look at, and probably we're almost coming to the end of that. So let me just finish that. But the example we have here is in December 2008, Captain Moussa Dadis Camara seized power in a coup after the death of a long-time ruler of Guinea, Lansana Conte. On December 3rd, 2009, on the first anniversary of his coup, Camara was shot in his head by his former aide-de-camp in an assassination attempt. He survived and was sent to Burkina Faso, which is also ruled by a military despot who was called by then Blaise Compaoré, to recover. On August 2nd, 2005, again, army officers overthrew President Mouia Ould Sid Ahmed Taya of Mauritania in a boundless revolt. He was toppled by his former security chief and a close colleague, Colonel Eli Oud Mohamed Val. My situation reminds me of the old adage, God save me from my friends, I will take care of my enemies. President Taya told Radio France International from Niger. I was stunned by the coup d'etat and even more so when I heard who were the authors. That's the end of our reading. It's been a long reading, but yes, we will take some few quick reactions to this as we are having 12 minutes to end our session. Anybody want to comment on those texts? It's been a long one. I believe you can have more to comment on that. If you want to comment, feel free to come in. Anybody? Brother Coco? Do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I will start first by going to what you call the root causes of problems in Africa. I think our brother had already alluded to some of those problems when you talked about colonization. They're talking about economic collapse here, you understand? But they are not really talking about where did all that come from. Number one, we went through colonial education, but I don't think we were really given the right education to rule ourselves or to lead our countries into a greener future in which our countries could do well. Most of those who got colonial education, it was just meant for them to steady the ship or to do what the colonizer wanted them to do. So when you look at the countries which is talking about, especially the shortage in fuel, shortage in food, shortage in all of those things, these are new colonies. They continue to supply raw materials to their erstwhile colonial masters. So all of those things are inevitable. They will happen. Because if you are Kenya and you continue to only supply cash crops, it means you're not using your land for productive purposes, feeding the people, for instance. You can't because you are busy actually selling cash crops and hoping that the foreign exchange you collect from that cash crop, then you can use to buy other stuff from other countries. Ironically, when you can actually grow those crops or raise those products within your own economy. So a lot has happened here, which he has not covered. He hasn't talked about the economic problem. There are lots of issues there. So the other one is the oil. Nigeria being one case in particular. They have been selling crude oil, crude petroleum for years, for decades. And Shell has been benefiting from that. Not just Shell, also jobs here in the UK where the refineries are. So it only benefits those countries for us to continue selling raw materials because then we sustain their jobs. If we don't, then there's trouble. He is not talking about that. Instead, he is focusing on symptoms. Those are not root causes. The root causes are that the economic systems we are following are flawed, and the education we got has not been for our own benefit. Let's just be clear about that. It's just like when you have a colonial empire, a colonial industry, and you don't want these people to get too educated because then they might topple you, they might lead to a revolt against you. You only teach them enough just to know how to run the machines, right? Or just how to lead the people so the people can listen to them and follow them and continue to do what you expect them to do. Aida is not talking about any of those. Yet he's talking about how civil wars are not healthy. Yeah, I agree. Civil wars are not healthy. But the first thing is, we go back to what we said. The storm men were imposed on Africans. The storm men, it was an agenda by the United States to support storm men who were at that time seen as revolutionaries. So they came up with what we can call them the counter-revolutionaries. And those were the worst of the West. So allow me to stop here because I can see that we don't have time. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Coco. Anybody want to come in? Any other person want to comment? Sawindok, do you have anything to say? Sawindok? Brother Ifo or Sister Chisomo, any of you want to say anything?
I see Sister Chisel's hand up. I don't know if it's just a legacy hand or. Okay, I
No,
will go
Sister
then.
Chisomo's hand, I think, is a legacy hand, Brother Ifo.
Okay. Yeah, no. I have too much to say and too many thoughts on this. Um, hmm. I think we need revolution, um, and revolutionary analysis as we read this sort of text. Um, and I agree with the last speaker. The root cause, the reasons why um, many of these so-called former colonies are only still mostly trading with the people that colonized them before, and are mostly still exporting the goods that the former colonies need or want, is a sign that the colonialism we haven't actually even we haven't even decolonized. You look at how many African countries have African languages as their official language. You know, um, how many have Afrocentric education system? Most of our education is Eurocentric. They're still teaching in Nigeria that some idiot from Europe was the one who discovered the River Niger, even though it was Africans that had to take him there. So we are not even teaching our children to understand that they are human beings. We're teaching them that they are inferior to the West. If you're in the southern part of Nigeria, for example, and if you're in the north, you're being taught that you're inferior to the Arabs, which is why people will wear the names of our enemies with pride, you know. And so we talk about how do we defeat dictators. If we've been socialized to accept dictatorship, you know, we see people keep voting against their own interests. That's in the case where there's actually voting, you know, and then the rest of the time somebody steals the vote, and you have all the religious leadership, regardless of whether it's Christian or Muslim, all of them will come out and be thanking the Almighty for the big thief that just stole the election. Right? So even within the institutions that are supposed to be, um, in theory, spiritual based, they're looking at what will give them the most amount of money for the institution, whether that is who is going to donate the most or whatever. So it's the same um, dictatorial system that the the religious institutions benefit from. Because religious institutions, you would see when there's allegations of of a young girl being sexually abused or some other abuse, you will find that those religious institutions will support the abuser and try to exile the abused. They will even teach that as a holy practice. I had a case about a year or so ago where some woman was telling me about how she did some work for someone and the guy refused to pay her. And she had hired people to do work as well. And the guy would only pay her on the condition that she show up at the hotel. This was a married man. And she refused to do that, so the guy never paid. And she said, as a good Christian, she cannot mention the guy's name because she doesn't want to spoil his name, which means we're creating systems where it's where we only tell, we only punish the the victims of crimes, and we find religious excuses for supporting the most vile human beings, which comes back to what's going on right now there. I'm in North America, so we have the Canadian Parliament or Senate gave a standing ovation in honor of one of the most effective, vile Nazis and feminists that has ever been in America. That was just killed recently, Charlie Kirk. So, what are we saying to ourselves? You know, it is it is really really scary, and the funding for the military is something else. So, but I am hopeful that as people get to see the naked terrorism that all these so-called systems of peace and democracy are actually doing the exact opposite. I think the only honest thing that Trump has done is to rename the Department of Defense to the Department of War, because I don't remember the U.S. defending anything. But I will leave at that. I see Sir WHK has something to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Brother Ifo. So, Windhoek, maybe yours will be the last comment because you are almost to our time. But please, I really look forward to your comments, Windhoek.
You're really looking forward to my comments.
Yes, yes.
Hey, that's very interesting. Tell me, after having read all these chapters in this book, what are we ought to have achieved with the fast tracking of the unification and development of Africa?
Brother Ifo,
It's just a
you are
thought
to ask
that
me the
came to
question.
my mind. It's just a thought that came to my mind, and I don't know where to direct it. Maybe just a food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have come to an end, but I think your question is very important because study is very important, and some of us who want to transform Africa or unify Africa, our source of information sometimes is based on written records or text. And the problem is if you don't develop some level of critical analysis, you might be influenced. Us reading these texts can be able for us to, for example, we have been able now to differentiate between the action and the person committing the action. We are learning some other things in terms of how systems are compromised, even how systems are meant to compromise the citizens' interest. I think it's very important that we are conscious of this so that even in our pursuit to unify Africa or change governance for purpose of African, we don't go down the same lane. Sometimes, even if you have to go down the same lane, we also must be able to distinguish between the influence of Western systems to our system and also the influence of education to authors who are trying to prescribe the direction for Africa. Because each author might want to propel, but are we able to be critical enough to get that silent code, to go beyond the text written, to understand the author's standpoint and the reason why or where they're coming from? And that's why we do encourage that this is a class where people share their critical thinking. We are not just a reading club. And I think if we are aware of this, and you're aware of the causes that makes this happen, we'll be in a better place to see how we want to advance our Africa forward together. Because if you have to advance Africa, the people want to safeguard their leadership, not the interests of Africa. People have been in power for almost 50 years and are not advancing even towards Africa unification. And we must also understand, even in that United States of Africa, how will we avoid this? Because the element that we can even have a one united government does not end the problems of Africans. There's still a possibility of such of this element creeping in. How do you become vigilant? Not to repeat the same mistake, but to have a true unification that safeguards our interests in our own way. So I think it's very important for us to be very open-minded in this class and very critical, so that when you come out of here, you form your own level of consciousness, your own critical analysis, and you're able to see things in your own way, analyze. You should not see things only in the author's lens, but you must be able to develop your lens to look at things so that you can be able to come out of this situation we are in. So that's briefly what I'll say. But as I've said, probably we are 5 minutes past our time. Things will come up. But I think some might have asked even before, why do we read this book? Why do we continue reading it? But I think it's still very important that we read it, because when you realize that there might be too much of what is probably contrary to what you think of, it's very important to refocus and understand that other side of story so that you can be able to walk out from it. But Cook, I'll only allow you maybe 1 minute to share something as we bring this to an end.
Yeah, thank you. In response to your question, Servant Hook, it's enriching to understand different perspectives, especially because we read the CSG conscientism on Thursdays, but voices such as Aite are not heard. And again, he focuses more on the dictators. He focuses more on the dictators. I think that is why we had to delve into that. And actually, as Pidgin has said, does it make sense? Is what Aite writing correct? Is something which we are supposed to be following blindly, or do we have to think? So, as we can see from what we have read today, there are lots and lots of gray areas. There are lots of issues which he's not addressing properly, or from a standpoint of a progressive Pan-Africanist.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, comrades, let's try to meet again next Tuesday. And I think in next Tuesday, we will be looking at how do you reform a despotic regime. So let's also think what he's thinking in line with this. And let's see what he's trying to come out with. But let's also see if it makes sense for us and whether is that what we think is the right way. So thank you very much, and may you have a lovely evening. Let's meet again next week on Monday, now that we have moved officially from Sundays to Monday, just to allow most of our members to attend also Sunday commitments that are too many based on meetings that are going on. I believe members will still find some more time to now join us on Monday, and it's for the purpose that we all move together. I therefore actually urge members to join some of the meetings that go on Sunday, and I'll be able to circulate those meetings on our YouTube and our CSG broadcast list so that we still get engaged to some other meetings. Not that we get now to rest on Sunday. There's a lot of fundamental and very important meetings within the Pan-African space that goes on Sunday. Comrades, permit me to thank you for joining the first Monday meeting of this class moving from Sunday. And I hope that we'll continue doing this until we come to an end. Probably we might come to an end of this book within some sooner. Might not be, we are half of it, but we might move faster. But thank you very much, and may we meet again next Monday. Have a lovely evening to you all. Bye for now.